I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we are speaking with author Ralph Pilolli about his groundbreaking book, Land of Philantasy. This unique literary work blends philosophy and fantasy, taking readers on an extraordinary journey through an imaginative world featuring 8 short stories, a novella, and a ditty. Be prepared to be captivated by Pilolli's Philantasy and discover stories that challenge conventional storytelling, inviting you to step beyond the archway into a realm where the unusual and thought-provoking come to life. Ralph, thanks so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure.
What was your inspiration behind Philantasy? How did you come up with this?
Well, I belong to a group of writers that we would go once a week to meet. And finally, I wrote a story. It was been in my head for a long time. And I finally hit the beginning. One day it just hit me. And I started it. And then when I read it to the class, they said, gee, what do you call that? And I went home and thought about it. And I said, well, it's philosophy and fantasy, philantasy. There it was. So it wasn't hard to come by because the first story was very unusual. It took place in a woman's womb.
Mm.
And and uh, and the model of that whole story is you got to live what you create. He was a very mean man and had a woman on the side that he went to, and she had 6 kids, and she treated him really bad,
Mm.
and he didn't care. So he got her for number 7, and so he's bragging about it. But he's at a tennis match, and he's 45 years old, and he's got to meet a younger guy. So he had some pills in his locker, and he's in his locker room now. And he takes the pills and washes them down with a little vodka. So then he does some push-ups just to loosen up, and then he starts feeling woozy. So he lays down in the bench in front of him, and he's laying there, and he doesn't realize it, but he dies there. But he's in an illusion, and he's reminiscing in his mind how he got Barbara for the number 7 and laughing about it, and because he says, she's going to treat him terribly. And so then he just keeps going back in time, how he cheated his partner. I think this one was a lawyer, and he was stealing the funds. And I'm really building him as a real heel. And in fact, my wife at that time was typing it because I didn't type, and I had to have in fact, when I wrote Benny Baby number 7, yeah, my wife typed it, and she was getting really pissed off at the guy as she's typing. So anyhow, it turns out that he's reminiscing back, and then he's wondering why it's so dark. Don't they turn on electricity here? He had a locker way back in a corner, and and he's and finally he sees light. He says, "Oh, finally they found me. I must have died." He's thinking to himself, and of course, the light. Then all of a sudden, he feels himself being dragged out, and then he's hung upside down, and he's looking at Barbara there, and says, "Why are you laying there like that?" And then he realized. Then there's a slap, and then there's a cry, and he's being born into what he created. And that's the motto and the philosophy of that particular story. And that was my very first story I ever wrote.
Amazing.
And then I submitted it to Mystery Writers of America, a seminar, just for a critique. Well, it won first place. And when they announced it, they said, "We don't know why we chose this one. It's not even a mystery, but it's so different." And I took quite a comment. I said, maybe I am a writer. You don't really know that. You always got to prove to yourself that you're a writer, that people will read what you write.
Right.
And so that's where the fantasy came from. And from there, and in this group was challenged by a second group taught by the same teacher. And they challenged us because we used to make fun of each other. So he says, "You're such a smart ass. Let's let's see you write something about never cry purple."
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my second story, and that was how a android could marry a human.
Hmm.
But so you're mixing uh, orange and purple, uh, uh, orange and what is it? Why I forgot the combination by now. Anyhow, um, so then the child, they can't produce a child, so they go to a duplicate creator. Okay, and so he walks into the office with nothing but mirrors because everything duplicates itself. And so Mr. Dogmai comes out from nowhere, and he's there. And he says, "Can I help you?" He says, "Yes, we're Mr. So and so, and we come for our child. I heard that he was ready." So he brings the child out, and and there's a lot that goes on in between. But then the child asks, "Where is my mother?" And she says, "Well, she's still home. We're going to go there, and she's crying tears of joy, waiting for you." And then the little child says, "Oh, I cannot cry, for I am purple." The combination of the two, and they say, and so then they're leaving, and um, the door when they went there it says, "Dogma, creator of life." So now it's a reverse mortgage because there's a mirror there, and it
Hmm.
says, "I I am Dogma," and it is Dogma turns as "I am God,"
Hmm.
duplicate creator of life, and that was the end of the story.
Wow. Wow.
All
Great
right.
story. It's extremely imaginative and kind of like bring you full circle at the end.
Yeah, all my stories do that, and I don't know the beginning. I start how I write is I have a title, and I'll write to that title,
Hmm.
and I don't know the beginning. I don't know the end. I don't know the middle. All I know is the first words out of my head I put down, and it could be the beginning or it could be used in the middle, and then it writes itself from that point on. I don't
Right.
know where it's going to go. I just know that it comes to me where it's going to go. I mean, I don't know ahead of time. I don't make notes either.
Hmm.
I just take it and keep it in my head. And that was Never Cry Purple. And oh, there's a retrial of Christ in there too. And that it was something I was trying to find a new story. So I have a Bible sitting here and I picked it out and I opened to the Garden of Gethsemane where Christ is betrayed. And the soldier, when they go to grab Christ, Peter takes his sword out and cuts the ear
Hmm.
off the soldier, and Christ puts it back. Well, that ear goes through time until all the people of that participant could be there, reincarnated, and it happens in the hospital. And or the last man to that could free Christ. What was his name? Oh God, there I go. That's that 90-year-old thing. Uh, and anyhow, oh God, what was his name? Oh, anyhow, there's a riot at the college, and this professor uh, gets caught in it, and he loses his ear. So he
Hmm.
goes to the hospital, and so the two Dr. Christo and Dr. Peters are there, and they're the physicians, and they and they say, "Well, do we have a?" He says, "Well, you've got to replace his ear. Didn't anybody bring it?" No. Well, we have ears in our collection of body parts, and so they bring an ear up and they put it on, and it matches the other one perfectly. Well, it turns out that the professor was the last man in Christ's time to condemn him to Pontius Pilate. And so he now is in front Christ. The scene opens up where he's back in time, and there is the professor, but now he's the uh, the person that condemned Christ,
Mhm.
and so I had him sitting on a throne, and then Christ and Peter are brought before him in chains, and he says, "Take off those chains. You know that this man has, what has he done wrong? You know." And anyhow, um, during their conversations that go on, there is a retrial of Christ. The devil is there, and there is oh yeah, and while he was in the hospital, he was visited by the devil to tell him to forget this whole thing. You know, it's just a dream.
Mhm.
And then there's a um, what's the one for truth? Oh, I call him Al. Okay,
Mhm.
for because there's a name that starts with Al, that is the altruist. That's it.
Mhm.
And and so altruist defends, and he defends Christ, and the devil is trying to prosecute it. I mean, get rid of the whole thing is what he wants, because he wants things to be as they are. And so there's a retrial there, and during the retrial, it was going wrong. So Peter again gets all upset, and he grabs a sword from a soldier and cuts the soldier's ear off. And then the whole thing goes away with Dr. Peters and Dr. Crystal there at his bedside saying, "What happened to him? The ear is, he has his ear in his hand." And he says, "And there's no blood. We don't understand this." And so anyhow, they said, "Well, that's the way it is. And I guess we can use that ear on somebody else." So the ear goes back into time again. And that's the end of the story.
Amazing. Amazing.
And
A little Twilight Zone-esque in a way, where it's like there's
oh yeah,
time travel and all that.
yeah, there's a lot of that. And there's all different stories throughout the whole thing. And there's a sequel to that book also. And it has 12 more short stories in it that are very interesting, but they all hold that same theme throughout the whole thing. Except in this one, I wrote a ditty. And I don't know if you understand ditty, and people don't when I say ditty. And it's just a little thing about to be or not to be a bee. And it is actually what man goes through, but this bee is going through it. And it rhymes all the way through.
Mm.
And so, anyhow, so I write in all different genres. And I mean, uh, but they're all the endings are a twist, and what you think is going to happen isn't going to,
Right.
but they all solve each other. There's justice.
Well, they're
So,
great stories. I imagine you had fun writing them, and you wrote them over a number of years, right?
well, yeah, that book I did, but the sequel I wrote all the new stories,
Okay.
and in between that I wrote a novel called Ring Around the Circle, which
Okay.
is another Philantasy story that is a whole other um, my world. Okay. And it's 494 pages. And
Wow.
again, when I started it, I didn't know it was going to be a novel. It's
Yeah.
just that it keeps writing itself, and you have to continue. You
Right.
just can't stop at any certain point. You got to, but then when it came to an end, I had no more in my head. I couldn't do anymore. And now what I'm going to do now is write a sequel to that one.
Gotcha.
And and I'm finding out sequels are hard to write, because you got to bring the story back into the reader's mind. And but he hopefully read the first book. But if he hadn't, you got to still tell a story that they'll understand. So you got to bring all of that into it, and it deals with politics. It deals with new inventions. It deals with uh, a lot of, well, the politics is what changes the whole story. And they find a new continent. And in my mind, at one time, at the Mississippi River, it was not there. It was just the ocean, and the continent had not yet joined. But then it joins. I mean, now it's not there; it's gone. But it would fit right into the Mississippi. That's how it was formed in my mind. And so it goes on, and the balloon is what I call what they call uh, balloons now. The
Right.
big ones you go for joyriding.
Yep.
And anyhow, but they called it BAL a dash LOON because when it was invented, they thought only loony people would go up in these things.
Mhm.
And so then, and they called it an airball. So then the hero of this whole story says, no, it's not an airball, it's a balloon. See, so I invented the word that way by splitting the two L's. And
Wonderful.
so
Wonderful.
it's very imaginary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What's your favorite part of writing? Is it getting entrenched in that world and creating it?
Yeah, well, I was kind of forced into writing when I was 18 because I used to build cars and race them.
Hmm.
And I was pretty well plugged into the sport of drag racing. So this gal used to call me every week for information on drag racing.
Mhm.
And so I, in turn, she would call me and I'd give her the information. And she would say, Ralph, my husband has been transferred out and I want you to write the column. And I said, geez, I got D's and F in English. I hated English. And 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 she says, no, you've got to write it. And so she convinced me. I said, the only way I'm going to get rid of her is to write one and have the editor tell me to go go away. And so I did. I wrote the first column, and I brought it to the editor of the paper, and he says, this is great. I want one every week on Thursdays and be in the Friday paper. And I said, okay, if you really think that's good. Then I realized, I'm starting to enjoy words
Yeah.
where I never did before. And so I figured maybe I can do this. Then I got caught in the Korean War. And so I had to drop everything. Time I got back to 2 years later, uh, I got married, a couple of kids, responsibility, and I didn't start writing. And then one day I saw an ad in the paper. It said writer's class, at one of the night school at night at one of the schools.
Hmm.
I said, I think my wife convinced me, go do it, will you? And so I did. And I sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes thinking, should I go in there and make a fool of myself? Can I really write? And I finally made it in there. And the first thing I said when I walked into class, which was already in session, I says, I'm only here to observe. Well, I was hooked from that point on. I just kept, I knew I could do it, but it took me a long time to write that first story, Penny Baby #7. And, but from then on, and when it won the Mystery Writers of America Award, I, I thought, maybe I am a writer.
Yeah.
And that's when I write Never Cry Purple and then the one in the hospital.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
And
quite an honor out of thousands of entries. Your very first work, right out of the box, you win this award from the mystery writers. That's pretty impressive, Ralph.
but I talked to the 5 judges afterwards, and they all said the same thing. We read the stories, they would go along reading, they got to mine, they read it, put it down, start reading the next one. They had to go back to mine because it kind of confused them. And every one of them said that, and they said it had to win. It wasn't even a mystery. So uh, I was thinking, well, I think I might be a writer, and that's when I start writing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And the novel you wrote called, was it Ring Around the Circle?
Yes.
What's that about?
Well, it takes place in a continent uh, that there's a group that lived amongst these. There were mountains all around them, and then the ocean. And anybody that ever went out in that ocean never came back. So they thought it was a flat world and they would run off. So they never explored much. And they lived in this, and it was always covered with a kind of clouds all the time. And they thought their God lived on the other side of that cloud.
Hmm.
And so, and the leader was a real selfish guy. Well, no, the original leader was very easy, and they had what they called what they call cigarettes. It was a different name, though. I had to give everything a different name, and they grew the wheat for it and everything, and also drinking beer. Yeah, they had and then they called it something else, of course, and
Mhm.
the old memory isn't going to come tell me until I hang up. And so anyhow, then there was a leader coming in. They had a big election. I showed the election, and he lost the one that was challenging the original leader. And so the original leader, they had a god they called above the clouds, and he was going to prove that he was there. So he goes up into the mountain. That's how the story begins. Am I going on too much?
No, no, no. It's very interesting.
Okay. And he tries to get a hold of the leader, challenging him. And then there is a challenge.
Mhm.
And then the leader tells him in a different way that he exists. So it's all in the dialogue and all of that stuff. And and so anyhow, but he leaves, and then the one that lost the election takes over the government,
Mm.
sends his troops there to pick up the presider. I don't call him president. I call him a presider. And they pick him up and they take him to. They're having a big festival there, and anyhow, they anybody that believed in that leader were put in a boat, and their boat. Because they used the river for bringing all the food. There's a big river there,
Mm.
and and they they take him, put him out to sea. He says, "Go off the end of the world. You're not wanted anymore." And they spiked the water that they gave him with the chemical that made him sterile. They couldn't reproduce, and so there's an adventure that they get there, and and then they see that yeah you don't hear of him anymore, and then the son of the presider is starting this balloon thing. Okay.
Mm.
And so they had a big and the new leader, the people were kind of rebelling against him, the young ones, telling him, why can't we do something? We're just surrounded in this area, and that's all we know. And so they started this balloon thing. Well, then the leader thought, maybe we can satisfy them. Let them build what they want to. So they build this balloon. It's like a boat. In fact, if you could see the picture, there's a bunch of balloons there in the back of that picture there. And and so they tether this thing, except something happens to the tether, and they're launched, and they go
Mm.
off, and they're floating, and they actually make it to the other continent that which when you'll know more if you read the book, of course, um, that they made it, and they made a colony there on this new land. It was the other side of Mississippi, see?
Mm.
And so they see that what's happened there, and the leader had made a account of everything that happened, okay, and uh, how he was rebelled against and shoved off into the waters, and but you can see everything. I mean, everything in the writing of it, just where they're at, and the reviews even say that they can follow everything, and it's very picturesque and so forth. And so that's how it turned out to be 494 words, 800. What is it? 94,800 words.
Wow. Wow. Well, you've got quite an imagination for sure. Before we leave, I just wanted to know what's your favorite creation? What's your favorite work that you've made?
Uh, well, I never thought I'd write a novel,
Mm.
and but I like Philantasy, the very first book,
Yeah,
because it got me started,
sure.
and it got my imagination going very strong. And And now I'm, like I say, going to write another book. I've already kind of figured out how the sequel is going to be started off in Ring Around the Circle, but I haven't written it yet. And the reason I haven't, I want to see what's going to happen to these three books that I have written,
Right.
because I kind of got to have my mind open to write another book. And I
Absolutely.
kind of think about this. And of course, Bookside Press has really helped me out on this. And that's what I'm very grateful for. I've gone to two other publishers. One had fallen off the face of the earth, took my money and ran.
Mm.
And then the second one, who has, I thought I was relying on them, but they I could, there was a period there I couldn't even get a hold of anybody there.
Right.
Then they said, well, this man is sick. That's why I'm taking over. I had four people take over my book.
Yeah.
And I just said, I can't do that. So I was looking for another one, and it was Bookside Press. And they're very, very helpful. And I really feel good about them.
Yep, they do a great job. I'm glad you're with them because they helped bring you here today as well. The name of the book is Land of Philantasy. It is written by Ralph Pilolli. It is a series of short stories, a novella, and a ditty. And they are quite imaginative, that is for sure. They are very, very entertaining. It's a wonderful blend of philosophy and fantasy, hence Philantasy. Ralph, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel very privileged.
Privilege is all mine, sir. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time, this time. Until next time on Spotlight.